Yes, and I'm alive and awake, and it's more than I can take too, Jordan. Hi everybody. This is Chuck Horton from Double Cross Radio. Welcome you to another Thursday night of freedom, as I come to you live from Jefferson. And oh gosh, I lost my script. There it is. I wanted to call everybody's attention the fact that I'm here solo tonight because my co-host Drew is taking some time off from the show to work on this growing business model, and I don't want you guys to be thinking there's some bad blood between us, because Drew is probably my best friend in the world, and I miss him a lot on this show, and he's kind of urging me to kind of pack it into and get ready for stuff that's going to be happening in the near future, and kind of redouble our efforts and make sure we're ready to ride through this stuff that's coming down the road. And I think I still have a couple more shows left in me, so I might be here another year or so. Anyway, and Drew might feel the itch to get back in the saddle and find a day or two here and there where he can pop in every once in a while also. And he's so anyway, he does have just to give you kind of a insight into what that's all about. He doing this show, it's we don't just talk about current events because they're kind of dated. I mean, you can't go back and listen to an archive show and get a real sense that you're going to be learning a lot of stuff. I'm trying to more model what we talk about on, like Tom Woods. He talks about, it's more of an educational thing. I don't think we're anywhere as good as Tom Woods, so I'm not putting myself in his class. But that's more what have always tried to do, and we'll have discussions on things like philosophies of things like gun ownership, and philosophies of free market economies, and how much more morally superior free market exchange is to the fascist economic model that's in play today in the United States. Anyway, for the same reasons that we've been telling you that we're kind of heading to some bad times in the near future, we're not sure when. That's one of the problems with economics. It's kind of tough to produce more, to predict more than the next day, and the next day is probably going to be a lot like the last day, and then all of a sudden it won't be. And you don't know which day that is. And so, it could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now. Who knows? But we do know that the history of the world is replete with examples of fiat currencies that have collapsed, and the kind of the ruin that it brings with them for a short period of time for the countries that happen to have them. I emphasize there a short period of time. It isn't the end of the world. But you can come through it in much better shape if you're prepared for it. And so that's one of the things we want to talk, or I want to talk about tonight. There's no we here tonight. There's just me, no frog in my pocket or anything. So anyway, when you're preparing for a show, you spend anywhere from 3 to 10 hours doing reading, maybe you're kind of thinking up some, like an outline of things that you want to discuss if you have a guest on, or points you want to make sure you cover when you're talking about this stuff, because when you get on here, kind of focusing on the words you're going to use, and sometimes you can lose your place, and it's nice to have some written material that you can refer to. Well, it's right now the business that he's chosen to become involved in has become there's a lot more interest and excitement, investment, and all sorts of things, all sorts of activities centering around that kind of business. I'm talking about the aquaponics. And Drew, through the time that he's been doing this, has been contributing articles to blogs, and he's been helping, allowing people to stop in and give them free training on how he's working his thing, and he's very open about things that haven't worked and how he's gone around fixing them. And he's really become kind of the aquaponics gurus out there, and a lot of that, all that information exchange has kind of made him somebody that's has somewhat of a reputation that precedes him a little bit. And right now, is he he can take advantage of that and possibly get some products on the market and set himself up and also help people while he's doing this. This isn't just, he's not doing this only for profit. I mean, he wants to do this to enable himself to get the things he desires. And so he's going to produce things that other people want so that he will have the income to do the things he wants to do. And it's kind of it's a mutually beneficial exchange. It's nobody's being forced to do anything. And he doesn't misrepresent anything. He just sells his product. So anyway, I'm not sure exactly when and if Drew will be back on. Well, I haven't had a chance to talk too much about it. But I wouldn't be surprised if someday he's coming to us live from, let's say, Fort Galt in Chile, or someplace down near Acapulco, or maybe someplace over in Thailand. I mean, there's more than just what's going on here in Jefferson that's out there, and I think that's something that all of you have to consider too. You don't want to become chained. You don't want to chain yourself down to where you are, so when things go bad, you have no place to go. You have no bug out plan. You have no way to protect your assets. You have to just sit here and take it. That's something that you don't want to happen. And I'll get to that later on the show. And as I said, as I started this out, I don't like to talk too much about current events because it makes your content dated. In like 6 months from now, it won't be so relevant, possibly. It might be that we had some real defining statements, and so people will use this recording to make points and see, these guys were right. Well, that could possibly be. We've been right a number of times and things. Still, no one has picked up on that yet, but it's there's always that chance. But the major event that's happening right now, it's flooding the news, is the rioting in Baltimore due to the death of the young drug dealer. Now, I want to point out before I go any further that while I don't take drugs, I don't consider it a crime to sell drugs to people who are accepted. They're not being forced to buy them. It's a voluntary exchange, and the only people that are harmed are themselves. And some people will say, well, it harms society. Well, you can protect yourselves. I mean, druggies are not necessarily sharp people. They're kind of dull-witted. Their senses are impaired. If you can't protect yourselves from those people, and maybe some of them are hopped up and they're a little bit, they're taking different kinds of drugs, and they're aggressive, and they think that they're superhuman strength and whatever. Those people, you might need to have a gun or something, but we still do have the ability to protect ourselves in our home with a gun. But the media is portraying this event, and it's happening in Baltimore, as racial tensions. And as I was doing my work delivering to the different places I deliver my controlled substance to, by the way, that controlled substance is alcohol, which is also a drug, which people voluntarily exchange money for. But I just overhear conversations in the different places, and it's the area where I live is predominantly it's kind of like it's pretty much predominantly white, I guess is the way to say it. I think our next largest group of people would be Hispanics, and blacks are a pretty small minority, much smaller than any place else in the United States. And there isn't much sympathy for them in Medford for what's going on in Baltimore. They think, well, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody? And I had to have some heart-to-heart talks with a few people that just don't understand what's going on, and explain to them that I'm not going to. Someone's going to stand up and say, "Yeah, violence is the answer here," because they have no other place to go to. But I want all these other people to realize that when it comes down to that in your life, when everything's been taken away from you and you live in a rat-infested, slum, And then the people that are supposed to be protecting you, the law enforcement people, there actually shouldn't be law enforcement. They should be, police used to be protect and serve. Now they're enforce and arrest. Those people are actually killing some of your fellow members of society in the city where you live. You feel like there's no way that you can reform, overcome, or change this situation. It's almost a feeling of helplessness. And I think that this is something that is hard to explain to somebody that hasn't been to that point yet, where they feel like there's no hope. They have nothing left to lose. But trust me, you may be there sooner than you think when the dollar collapse comes. And how you're able to handle that and how you're able to go on is going to separate you from, you can be like what's happening in Baltimore, what happened in Ferguson, or you can go take a different path and you can rebuild your life, start again. But you have to understand some of the basic principles. You have to find a way to be free first. Because it just isn't going to work if you're going to be chaining yourself up to the government slave machine. Now, I think a lot of the misinformation that people had is purposely dealt to them by the mainstream media. They leave out important facts. When this guy, they said he died from a spinal cord injury, I knew at that precise moment when they said that it was in his neck, because that's the only kind of spinal cord injury that's going to kill you, because in your neck, the nerves that go to your heart come out of your neck. And so when you break someone's neck, that's what kills them, is it severs those nerves and your heart stops beating and you die. Well, that's what happened to this young man. And I knew it immediately. But I would bring this up there that his neck was broken. They said, no, they said it was a spinal cord injury. I said, well, what kind of spinal cord injury causes death? The one at the top of your spine in your neck. I mean, there's this, but they didn't, they purposely said a spinal cord injury to try and create doubt in people's minds. The police had anything to do with this. That, well, yeah, this guy should have been strapped in so he could arrive safely, and they could have driven slower. Who knows what was going on back there, what they're going over bumpy roads, or I don't know what's going on. Maybe he's trying to figure out a way to get out, and he's running around back there, and he shouldn't be, and they're trying some driving maneuvers to kind of knock him off his feet, which caused the injury. Who knows what went on? It could have been he just was restless, and he's trying to figure out a way he could bust out of the back door and go take a run for it. Who knows what's going on? I mean, there's a lot of things that could go on. We're going to find out if they ever come to trial, and I hope it does. And we get some real truthful testimony, and I hope that some of this testimony is really scrutinized closely for things that are wrong. But I want all of you here living in Southern Oregon that have been supporting the miners to realize that the miners up there in Gillese, they have something in common with those rioters in Baltimore. And the one thing that they have that's an advantage that the rioters in Baltimore don't have, they have oath keepers up there protecting them from the police, protecting them from authority. I shouldn't say police, because it's really the authority is the BLM. And that protection is enabling them to have their day in court. They may still lose. It's a federal court. It's hard for me to believe that they're going to get a fair shake, but they may. You never know. There's always that surprise that makes you smile at the end of the day, and that happens from time to time. I think we were talking about this in the prior show to our show tonight, and there's lots of other things they can do. They can also appeal. Miner Dave has been a frequent guest on our show. His appeal is all the way to the Supreme Court at this point, and he's going to know Monday or Tuesday whether they're going to hear his case or not. Each week they go through a bunch of the cases that get submitted to them, and they pick out the ones that they think need to be addressed, and then they don't all pick out the same ones, and so they'll go through those, and the ones they all agree on, they should go forward. They'll put those aside. They're going to go forward on the ones that some of us think that they should be heard and some of them don't. They'll maybe discuss it a little bit, I'm not sure exactly all this goes on exactly the way I'm saying it goes on, but it's something like this. And then they'll come down. They know how many they can deliberate on in the time they're given, and so they whittle it down to that number, and then they go on to the next week's stuff, and they announce those on Monday or Tuesday. And so he should know his is in this pool that's being looked at this week, and he should know early next week if he's going to make it or not. And even if he makes it, the answer can be no. So, but I think the fact that you've even gotten your case submitted to the Supreme Court is quite a triumph, and I tip my hat to Miner Dave. And he's going to be homeless here soon, but don't worry about that. The family property that he's been living on rent-free has been sold, and he's going to be able to get some of that income from the sale of that property, and that's going to tide him over until he can start drawing on his pension. I think that his life is going to be okay from here on out if he doesn't blow the money on something stupid. And so it's going to be quite a step up for him. So I'm happy for him that things are kind of going his way for a while here, and hoping that he'll be able to get back to his mining claim soon, and with his mining partner Marcus, and continue looking for that shiny yellow metal. But what these miners in Gleese have in common with the writers in Baltimore is their enemy. That's what they have in common. The enemy they have is government. It's government that has caused the problems that the miners are encountering, and it's government that has caused the problems the writers in Baltimore and in Ferguson are encountering. And they're different problems, but they're still caused by the same root source. These two groups should be allies because they have that common enemy. And so, and actually, all of you out here in our listening audience, you are also have the same enemy, because government is your enemy as well. Government is force and coercion, and they have us where they want us now, and they can make us do just about anything they want. They can make us buy health insurance we don't need, and they can make us give them a percentage of what we earn. And what right do they have? That's just theft, and there's no other word for it. They make you wear a helmet if you ride a motorcycle. They make you put seatbelts on if you're riding in a car. They require you to do all these different behaviors, and some of them might be for your own good. They might have you might say, well, I'm glad that there's a lot that's probably good for me that I have to put that seatbelt on because it makes me safer. I'm not sure I need the government telling me I have to put a seatbelt on to make me safer. And you know, when they first came out with the airbags, and that was deemed to save a lot of lives, make us safer, those airbags killed a lot of children because it was like being shot with a gun. It was causing concussions and brain damage and all sorts of problems. And these were for high-speed collisions of 1 or 2 miles an hour. The airbag would deploy, and it would just conk the kid in the head, and that's why children can't ride in the front seat anymore. So that, you know, government is not your friend. Government is your enemy, and just remember that. They don't have your best interest at heart. They were putting those airbags in the cars for someone else's profit. Someone makes money when they put those airbags in the car, and the cars cost more, and that more, some of it is just the cost of the product, and some of it is profit, and so someone gained. I mean, we sell millions of cars a year. Someone's making a lot of money on that. It's just, and you can say, oh, it's a free market competition. No, you don't. You don't have a free market. The government mandates what has to be put in there. Everybody has to put it in their car, and so everybody's getting charged the same thing, and maybe 1 or 2 companies are making all the money. It's just like being forced to buy insurance. It's no different. And we let them force us to do that. We're letting them force us to do a lot of things. And so don't be complaining that they're forcing you to have your kids have shots, or they're forcing you to buy health insurance that you don't want, or that's too expensive. It's taking food off your table. The government is our enemy, and just remember that. And your allies are the people that are being anybody that's being persecuted by the government is your instant ally. Because if you don't stand up for these people, they're just going to pick us off little by little. And the reason I think that they're working on blacks right now is that's one of the smaller minorities. And they're one of the easiest ones to stir up because they've been mistreated for so long. Kind of institutionalized discrimination. It's just cultural things. Blacks were doing much better. Poor blacks were doing much better than poor whites 60, 70 years ago. And then this thing called the War on Poverty started, and then welfare. And all of a sudden, they just kicked the black fathers out of the homes, and there was no male figure there to teach the young children disciplines and stuff. There was a mother there to nurture, and sometimes she had to be a tough disciplinarian too, but more often than not, she was working two jobs to, make ends meet, and wasn't there a lot. And they're chasing the dads who should have been there to help out that two people could live as cheaply as one if they do it right, or almost as cheaply. And they chase him out because she can make more on welfare than she can make with him there, even if he has a job. And so they destroyed the black families, and that was just a horrible thing that happened, but it happened, and that was a government program. And whether they did it with good intentions and had bad results, or they meant it to happen this way, doesn't matter. This is what happened, and only a government could make this happen. It would never happen in a free market. Well, just remember that. Don't be judging these people in Baltimore and the people that were in Ferguson. Don't be judging the miners up in Galice. Because your day is going to come, and you're going to know what it's like to stare down the abyss and know you have no other option but to jump in that abyss. You're going to. The wolves are coming down the trail at your back, and you can't go back on that trail. It'll tear you to shreds, and you're going to have to go into territory and unleash some inner demons in order to survive. And it may just be an emotional outburst, and it may be something that someone else gets you agitated and stirred up about. And I'm not advocating violence. I think that's really a poor solution to any problem. But you might feel that way someday, and you'll understand what's going through these people's heads now. And I don't say that it's okay what they're doing, but I don't think that people should try and paint a whole group of people based on the actions of maybe 50 to 100 people, and say all the blacks in Baltimore are crazy. Well, that isn't true. And you probably didn't see the pictures of the black people that lined up and linked arms to protect their police from the rioters. You probably didn't see those pictures. They probably didn't make your paper because the mainstream media doesn't want you to see the fact that, there's probably a lot more good people there in Baltimore that really want to build their community and don't like what's happening. Don't think burning down buildings is a good way to make your home a better place. And those pictures aren't making your newspaper, I bet. So the mainstream media, they're kind of letting themselves be known. It's all the news services are owned by about 6 different corporations worldwide. And the same people sit on the boards of directors of all 6 corporations. And so trust me, it's a propaganda arm of a much bigger group of people. Not larger in terms of numbers, but in terms of power, a much more powerful group of people. So don't let them divide you from groups of people that you have common interests with, that are your allies or your natural allies, because you both are facing the same enemy. You have to reach out to those people, and you have to let them know that you're on their side and that there's a peaceful outcome that's going to benefit everybody, and we have to work towards that outcome. And you have to start turning the people on the police department to realize that, hey, you have children, you have a wife, you live in this community. Is this how you want this community to be? We have to treat people better. We have to treat people like human beings, because lives matter. All human lives matter. And it shouldn't matter what the color of their skin is. And so those types of things are things we have to do. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought that, that these are kind of some generalities and platitudes or whatever. So things that are just, some people would even call them like gobbledygook, doublespeak or whatever. But they're more emotional than they're logical, but I think that they're consistent with the philosophy that we have on this show. And I think this is all happening because of one single root cause. And this single root cause is not because of government, but it's been enabled because of government. Because government has set up this private corporation with a monopoly on something in this country, a monopoly that we need, the monopoly that's one half of every business transaction. And this private corporation has a monopoly on that, the creation of that product. And I'm referring to the Federal Reserve. And it's a central bank. And they are the ones that are entrusted. It's a private corporation. We can't influence them at all with anything we do, but they are not a government body, even though it says federal on their name. They are a private corporation. It's not publicly held. It's held by basically some big banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, to name one, and a couple other ones that are in some of the movies about the crash in 2008. And this institution has, when we talked about this last week, in the first 100 years of its existence, it allowed 2,236% inflation. Now, inflation doesn't mean rising prices, because prices are determined by supply and demand. And there's been a lot of advances in productivity over that time, which should have driven prices down. But it didn't. They're a lot higher than they were in 1913. And so anyway, this is kind of lost my train of thought for a second. This is the root of the problem. Is the Federal Reserve, the private corporation with a monopoly on the creation of money. And they've created much more money than they should have. They've debased our currency. Now, I'm using those words interchangeably, and they really aren't. Money is actually what we have in our wallets, our Federal Reserve notes. They're really not money, they're currency. Money is something that's backed with something of real value. Federal Reserve notes are debt-based, and there's no guarantee they'll be honored at any value other than some arbitrary number. But the way the Federal Reserve works, they're able to create money out of thin air, and now with computers, it's even easier. They just make a few keystrokes, and an account is credited with a loan, and they deposit it into their account. So it's debited back, and it looks like it's a clean transaction. There's a loan, and something goes out, something comes in, and then on that amount of the loan that's deposited, they're able to loan out upwards of, I think it's 90% right now is the figure, but maybe 88% or something. But there's a certain amount they have to keep as reserves, and the rest they can loan out. It's called fractional reserve banking, and it is not a sustainable business model unless you can create money endlessly. And even then, it's not sustainable forever, because eventually the money becomes worthless, we are at that point in time now. Well, as I'm thinking about this week and kind of getting ready to continue on kind of with some of the stuff we were talking about last week and still bring these points forward, one of my Facebook friends in Buffalo, New York, sent me a link to an article by David Simon. And I don't really think very much of David Simon. And this article wasn't anything he'd written. It was a transcript of a speech that he delivered in Sydney, Australia a while back. When you listen to the speech, it sounds okay. But if you have any kind of understanding of history or money, capitalism, Marxism, collectivism, if you have understanding of what those things are and how they work, you know that there's a lot of errors in his speech. There's a lot of things that he misspeaks about that just don't make any sense. And all in all, I'd have to say his speech to me was a lot more like a steaming pile of horse manure than it was anything else that I've ever seen in my life. It was worthless, and it was full of misinformation and kind of cherry picking out things that aren't significant and trying to make them seem like they're significant. An example of this would be he says that he thinks that capitalism is the root of our problems, and he selects the date 1980 as the beginning of the downfall of America. Well, he didn't say it's the beginning of the downfall of America as Ronald Reagan was elected president, because he knows that for good or bad, and Ronald Reagan was no great president. He was a fairly mediocre, but he was probably among the best of the 20th century, which isn't saying much. And there weren't very many good presidents in the 20th century. But he was pretty mediocre. And, he said he was a small government guy, but government grew enormously during his presidency. And he did achieve some things which were helpful to us. But, there's a lot of stuff that he said he was going to do that he didn't do that I wish we had done, like closing the Department of Education, closing the Department of Energy. Those things would have been really helped our economy a lot, and would have been things that would have been paying dividends every decade, every year, actually. And he didn't ever get those done. He had a lot of, I guess you call them hidden spies in his administration, people that really were not on his side. And then he says that also, this, getting back to David Simon's speech, he says the renaissance of the American economy was 1932, which I don't know how he comes to that conclusion. He must, he obviously wasn't born then, he wasn't alive then, or if he was, I think he was living in England at the time. He's reading some pretty slanted history books if he's thinking of 1932 as the Renaissance. 1932 is people standing in bread lines and trying to sell apples to, it was basically the major cities in the United States were turned into what you'd see in a third world country today. So there's much to dispute about his speech, and I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over it, because I think it gives the speech a lot more attention than it deserves. Like I said, it's a pile of horse crap. But I thought it was interesting that capitalism here is being defined as the evil, and it's what represents what's wrong with the human race, and it's the cause of all of our problems. And I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, I remember that movie, The Princess Bride, and there's that scene where he goes, where the Spanish sword fighter goes, "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means." And that's kind of what I want to say about David Simon and his repeated attacks on capitalism. Well, first and foremost, what we have in the United States is not capitalism, okay? So in capitalism, you have free markets. So we just got through talking about something that could never, if you have this certain thing that we just got through talking about, you couldn't possibly have a free market, because this thing we were talking about required a government-enforced monopoly, something like legal tender laws, in order to exist. Well, there's nothing free about that. There's no competition. There's no free exchanges. You have one source, and I'm talking about the central bank. So you can't have a capitalism, free market economy with a central bank. It's just not possible. You have to have free banking. You have to have competition in banking. You can't have one currency. You have to have competing currencies. You have to let people choose the one that they have the most faith in. And so, yeah, some of them are going to get burned because they're not very smart. They're going to learn real quick how, who to trust and who not to trust. So that's the first thing. What we have in the United States, and we've had it since actually the late 19th century. They called it progressivism, but really what it is it evolved from progressivism into a kind of a combination between capitalism and socialism, which Mussolini called fascism. And most of the European fascists got all their things that led them to this from 1932, FDR, because he was a leading proponent of all the fascist ideas that became whatever they were doing in Germany, in Italy, Spain, Franco in Spain. All those things originated with programs that FDR started in 1932. And actually, they were continuing on. Some of these programs were actually began under Hoover's administration, because he was no great president either. He was just, I think he later saw that he was wrong, which I'll give him credit for that. But at the time, he kind of was leading the way and breaking down some of the resistance. And Roosevelt actually ran for election on more of a free market platform. And then as soon as he got in there, he just doubled down on everything that Hoover had done. And they created things like the NRA, and that's not the National Rifle Association. It's a National Recovery Act, which is about as fascistic a program as ever been put out anywhere in the world. And there were guilds that would determine what every product in America would sell for, what every wage for every person would be. You had no more freedom at all. This is the reason the Great Depression lasted 17 years, is because of government programs like this. It didn't. They had a much worse recession or depression in 1921, which only lasted 18 months. Because President Harding at the time actually had some economic intelligence and realized that they had to cut government spending, so they drastically cut government budget by up to 50%. And right away, things started getting better. Boy, wonder why we didn't have government wasting all that money. But within 18 months, they were in a full-blown recovery, and it brought on the Roaring '20s, when they easily slipped back into these bad ways of increasing the size and scope of government, more spending, trying to have government be the solution to all problems. And when the next depression hit, they decided to carry out these new plans that they had to have a government fix everything, and it lasted 17 years, that depression. And it wasn't a fun time to be alive. I remember my dad telling me when he was a kid how they would drive. He lived in Kansas, and they would drive into the city from their little farming community. They'd drive into the city on Sunday, and they'd buy 100 papers for $1, penny a piece. And they'd bring them back to their town, and they'd sell them for 2 cents a piece. And they'd make just about $1. Sometimes they'd sell out. They'd make $1. Then they'd take that $1 they made, and they'd buy 100 chicks. Little chicks just hatched out of their eggs. And his dad worked at a granary, and he'd sweep up every day around there. And when he was sweeping up in the dust, there'd be some seeds and corn and stuff and whatever. And so he'd always get to bring that home, and he'd feed that to those little chicks. And they grow up to be chickens, and every once in a while they'd slaughter one and eat it, and all that sort of thing. That's how they lived. I mean, they had nothing. My father, he didn't have his own pair of shoes that were not somebody else's first until he was 17 years old or something like that. If you looked at his feet, they're all twisted and gnarled, and you know, his toes go almost straight up because the shoes were always too small for him. And that's how it was. I mean, they would send in the summer, they'd send the kids down the creek to try and spear some frogs so they could have frogs for dinner. And they'd do that like once a month or something. It wasn't a rare treat. It was just something they needed some protein. It was a horrible existence, and it lasted 17 years. It started in 1929, and it lasted 17 years. It didn't end until 1946. And some people say the war brought us out of the Depression. That is not true. Things got worse during the war. There's a myth that there's wartime prosperity. There is no wartime prosperity. War is only destruction, breaking things, blowing up things, killing people. There's nothing produced during war except for profits for people who make bullets and ships and tanks and airplanes and things like that. War profiteers. Well, I'm getting a little bit off my subject a little bit, but I wanted you guys to know that the problems in our society are from the trying to implement these ideas of fascism. It's not capitalism. And every time you hear someone talking about capitalism as the problem, there's too much greed. Well, I mean, if you're a greedy person and you're known to be a greedy person and you're in a free market where you have competition, I think you would try and hide that fact because people wouldn't want to associate with you. They wouldn't want to buy your products. They wouldn't, if your products weren't good to start with. I mean, you can still be greedy and produce great products, but if you don't produce products that people like and you're just trying to, scam everybody and you're trying to rip them off, you won't be in business very long in a free market because there's competition that's going to come along and take your customers away from you. Well, in a fascist system, you'll still be in business because you can put regulations and controls in there that by bribing your government officials. I'm not talking about the elected ones. I'm talking about the unelected bureaucrats who have more influence over your life than your elected officials, just so you know. But that's called fascism. It's when the government and the industry kind of work together, and that's where greed can really take off. So greed is one of those things that's a symptom of a fascistic economy. It can't possibly exist in a capitalist system, in a free market system, because everything is a voluntary exchange. And if you're a scumbag, no one's going to want to buy your product or even hire you to work or anything else. If you're not a truthful person, there's no way you're going to be able to consistently trick people out of their money. I mean, you might be able to do a little bit of con men are still in around today. I just got contacted by a prince in Africa that told me that for a $5,000 advance, he would when he gets this UN grant, he's going to give me $5 million. And I thought, well, that sounds like a no brainer. I can do that. Yeah, sure. So there are con men still out there trying to get your money. And those are the people that are greedy, and doesn't have anything to do with capitalism. Capitalism is based on people who are willing to produce something to exchange for money to acquire something else that they want. They actually want to meet somebody else's needs in order to meet their own. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And that's what Drew believes in. That's why he's spending more and more of his time in what he's doing now, because he's starting to see there's more and more demand for the product that he can produce and the expertise that he has. That's why he's not here for a while, and maybe not ever again. I don't know. I have a feeling he'll be back, but I don't know when. And this might really take off, and it might consume a lot of his time for quite a while. So anyway, back to capitalism, free markets. We really never had true free market capitalism in America. For the first half of the 19th century, that would be like 1800 to about 1848 or so, we were pretty close. And the main reason we were really close was there was no central bank. Coming in the first part of the 1800s, there was, but its charter expired, and Congress wouldn't renew it because there were so many problems with the bank. And so it was kind of, I guess it had to be renewed by a large majority, supermajority or something, 60%, and there weren't the votes to renew it, so it didn't get renewed. And they started to try a second bank in the United States in it was to finance a war. Oh, that's always a war. And when that was over, it caused a huge economic collapse in 1819. Murray Rothbard wrote a great book on that called The Panic of 1819. I recommend it to read. People who want to learn a lot about economics, that's a really good thing. Anyway, from that point on, Andrew Jackson was soon elected president, and then he took away their charter. He dismantled the central bank, the second bank of the United States, and what happened after that was the United States ended up having no real wars for quite a while. They had no national debt. They had no taxes to speak of. There was a small tariff, which is kind of still a tax, but there was no income tax. There was no property tax. There was basically people were free, and it lasted for pretty close to 30, 40 years through the Jackson administration, and then Martin Van Buren, who may have been the best president the United States has ever had. He was actually the mentor to Andrew Jackson and was his economic leader. And he had been mentored by Thomas Jefferson. So these people were they really understood freedom. They understood that free people were going to be the most prosperous. And that was probably the golden age of America. And I was just sad that it lasted for such a short period of time. But after that, those bankers got involved again and got us into a civil war. And that was, after coming out of that, we owed so much money to so many people. We had to go to the bankers to get loans, and we were in terrible debt. Then the bankers insisted that we incorporate our nation so that you could sign off as a corporation, because the corporation never dies, and they could hold that debt over your head forever until you paid it off. And so the Act of 1871 was passed, and that was kind of they're starting to put nails in our coffin at that point. And it took quite a while because there were still a lot of people that were opposed to what was going on, and it was very slow ground. They were not making huge progress. But by 1913, they were able to illegally pass the Federal Reserve Act, the income tax, and remove the restriction for senators to be chosen by their state legislatures and had them elected by popular vote. And after that, the senators could be bought just like anybody else because they couldn't be recalled at a moment's notice by the legislature for voting against the interests of the state. And we had income taxes put on place, and they said, this is only going to be for the top 1%. Only the very, very rich people are going to pay. And actually, for the first year or two, that's only people who were taxed. But look where it's come from there. And the IRS is the single largest criminal organization in the world. They go around the world confiscating people's property like pirates. Only the pirates were much more honorable. They usually left something behind. IRS cleans the stuff to the bone. Put people in prison. They're worse than pirates. So anyway, I guess I just assured that I'm going to get audited. So this reminded me, all this I'm rambling on about here reminds me of a quote from Frederick Bastiat. He said there's two kinds of individuals. One that is content to produce something in order to acquire that which he desires, and the other, while willing to labor for his quest, would much rather use force to take what it is he desires. So, to me, I said, well, I don't think I can find any flaw in his quotation there. That seems exactly perfectly described those two groups of people. The second group of people, unfortunately, are now in charge of the United States and have been for quite some time. And one by one, they've been dismantling the constitutional guarantees of freedom until that document is becoming largely irrelevant. The current economic system that we are under right now seems to be how our country is organized. I mean, it seems to be closer to fascist Nazi Germany in the 1930s than it is to anything that was envisioned by our founding fathers. But David Simon in his speech was right about one thing. There are two Americas on display now, but he missed the composition of those groups. One of his group is about 3% of the population. They are not necessarily wealthy. This is a 3%. They're just, some of them might have some wealth. It doesn't have anything to do with their economic standing, or very little. And that 3% of the people who are awake, and I think just about anybody who's listening to this, either as a podcast or listening live, you're probably in that 3% because you are aware of what's going on to you. You're aware of the treason that's been committed, the treachery, of the enslavement of the American people through the tax codes, among other things. But 3% is a very small minority. And the other group, and even though it's a small minority, is growing, but the other group would be 97%, and that group is made up of low information people who are busy with their personal lives, and they have been successfully programmed to obey the commands of authority. Now, if you listen to the words of our theme song, comes into the show, Jordan Page is saying just before he fades out, he says, I will not submit to the authority of man. And that's part of being free, because in order to submit, it means force and coercion are being used against you. And force and coercion, that's the opposite of freedom. Freedom is the absence of force and coercion. And when force and coercion are forcing you to submit, then you know that you're a slave. And that's where we are right now. Now remember, money is half of every transaction. And I want you to just stop and think about, I'm going to be silent for just a second here. Think about that for a second. Money is half of every transaction. Last week we told you about the 2,236% inflation during the first 100 years of its existence that the Federal Reserve had caused. Now, in that inflation, we're not talking about all of general prices, as I said, because as of increases in productivity, a lot of those rising prices were never seen. But things should be much less expensive today than they are. It's a general debasement of the money. And that debasement of the money changes how we value everything. It changes our personal values, the relationships we have with other people. It allows people in Baltimore to burn a building down because they don't see that there's any value. There's no way to measure the value of that property to them anymore. Their lives have been destroyed. They have no hope. When I told you earlier that day might come for you someday, so be careful how you judge these people, because you might be there someday yourself when you no longer have any measure in which to value that which you're about to destroy. And you'll destroy something that does have value, but you have no way of knowing what its value is, because the thing that you use to measure the value of everything in your life has been debased to an extent that it no longer measures anything. And that's one of the things that people who have chronicled the Nazi Germany that they have discovered is it didn't just, when they had their hyperinflation, it didn't just destroy their economy. It destroyed the way people saw other people, the way people treated their children, destroyed their families. It destroyed everything that they had a value on, because as the money is debased, the currency is debased, that way of measuring value evaporates, and they have no other way of saying this is better than this. There's no way to associate, to figure out what the cost of anything is, the value, the man hours that it takes, and the return on investment. All those calculations that you subconsciously do, they're gone, and you might still have a relationship with somebody, but it's not going to be the same as it was before, because these values and the way of valuing them has been destroyed. And if you look at our society and how we're being divided and split apart, and people are hating other people, how much is that due to the dollar debasement that's been taking place from the Federal Reserve? The uprisings in Ferguson and Baltimore should never have happened, but they did. And they happened because the Federal Reserve has debased our way of evaluating everything. And they've taken away the ability of people to live freely and to keep what they earn, because in order for the Federal Reserve to operate, you have to have an income tax in order to pay the interest on the debt. And so we become chattel slaves. Your Social Security number isn't so you can get a Social Security check when you get to age 66. Your Social Security number is a tax number, and it's an identification number for the Federal Reserve, so that they know just on an aggregate what the value of an individual's life is in terms of the taxes they'll produce, and all that goes to the Federal Reserve. None of the taxes that you pay for anything the government does. They all go to pay interest. They all go, well, they used to, but now they all go to pay interest. And the other government spending is all deficit spending, which is paid for by bonds. And those have interest associated with them. And so that is what all the taxes are for, is to pay for that stuff. And I don't know. I don't think that we're in a spot where we can change this right now because, change it in time to stop things from collapsing, because right now we are outnumbered. The people that depend on a government for a check every month, and I don't just say the people on welfare or the people that have government jobs or the people that are in the military. I'm talking about crony capitalists, people like GE or Monsanto. Their whole existence is based on the government, so they're not going to vote against a government. They're not going to vote to be free because that would ruin their whole cause. When we first started this show 2 years and 9 months ago, we had quite a few apocalyptic warnings about the quantitative easing going out of control and the boom bust stuff and the bubbles and inflation and all this stuff. Well, we were there were other people saying it, but not very many. Now there's a lot of people saying it. And I think it's going to happen sooner than later. And I think you should be preparing yourself for it. And don't be like those people in Cyprus who woke up one morning, the banks were all closed, and they didn't have any way to buy food or anything like that. Another one of the songs that Jordan Page wrote has a lyric to it I think is very appropriate here. And the song is called Reckoning, and it says, "Through the mist I heard a voice. You have a chance, now make your choice." So I'm going to leave you with that tonight. Boy, that was pretty good timing. That was an accident. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week. I don't know for how many more weeks, though. So we'll see you next week, though, for sure. Talk to you later. Bye.
You're bound to break.